The Antarctic, the most hostile place on Earth. Under the South Pole lies a continent with glaciers up to 2 miles in depth. This mammoth ice cap presses down so heavily that it actually distorts the shape of the Earth. The ice never melts, spawning winds, storms, and weather that affect the entire planet. In the winter, the temperature reaches to 100 degrees below zero. When winter descends on the southern continent, the surrounding seas begin to freeze at a terrifying rate of 2 square miles every minute. It is a truly hostile environment. In 1915, a British crew of 28 men was stranded there, with no ship and no contact with the outside world. They all survived.
Through thick and thin, how Ernest Shackleton's method of servant leadership turned tragedy into triumph.
Between 1915 and 1917, while the majority of the world was consumed with fighting World War I, Sir Ernest Shackleton and his crew were attempting the first land crossing of the Antarctic when they became stranded after their ship, the Endurance, was crushed by pack ice and eventually sunk. This tragedy was turned to triumph when Shackleton rescued all 27 men. To get his crew home safely, he led them across ice, sea, and land with all the tools he could muster. His commitment to a larger purpose and imaginative methods to achieve a goal is a model for the leaders of the 21st century. Ever since James Cook first discovered the continent in 1773, Antarctica had become a mysterious land and a passionate conquest for those with the heart of an explorer. At the turn of the century, when all the world had been explored with the exception of Antarctica, the new heroic age of Antarctic exploration had begun. 3 key figures, Ronald Amundsen, a Norwegian explorer, Robert Scott, and Ernest Shackleton, both Englishmen, began a race to be the first to reach the South Pole. Scott's expedition failed, but Amundsen made it to the South Pole on December 14, 1911. Robert Scott, just 1 month later, stumbled upon the South Pole to find Amundsen's banner. He and his team tragically died on their return trip. After the conquest of the South Pole, there remained but one great main object of the Antarctic journeying, the crossing of the South Polar Continent from sea to sea.
The distance will be roughly 1,800 miles. Half will be over unknown ground. Every step would advance geographic science. It will be the greatest polar journey ever attempted.
Shackleton put out an ad in the newspaper stating,
Men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success.
Around 5,000 men applied. Shackleton's sheer willpower and personal magnetism made him an irresistible leader. He carefully chose 26.
In lots of ways, he was very much ahead of his time. 100 years ago, leaders did not take so much trouble to know their men.
Frank Hurley, a 24-year-old photographer with experience in Antarctica. Frank Worsley, captain. He was eccentric and had many uncanny navigational skills that were essential to the expedition. Frank Wild, second in command, had spent 6 years in Antarctica and logged 5,000 miles of sledging. Percy Blackborough made the crew 27 when he was found as a stowaway and later became a steward. The rest were able seamen, 2 doctors, a few university scientists, a carpenter, and a cook. His advertisement attracted risk-takers, a team of men who weren't afraid of challenges, more so they expected them. Shackleton did not choose his men purely for their skill or expertise. Leonard Hussey, the meteorologist, was a banjo player. Shackleton knew that it would be the small things that would keep the crew's morale high.
With the onset of World War I, Shackleton offered a ship to his government. Lord Admiral Winston Churchill cabled only one word: proceed. Shackleton and his crew left Britain on August 8, 1914. On December 7th, they entered the pack ice. Their plan is to sail through the Weddell Sea and be the first to achieve an overland crossing of the continent. For 6 weeks, the Endurance battled the ice but was still 100 miles from the continent. Suddenly, the temperature dropped and loose ice came together, trapping the ship. The ship's log noticed the worsening weather. Now stuck on the Antarctic ice, Shackleton tries to keep his spirits high. By giving the crew regular tours and playing games of soccer on the ice, the crew is making a valiant effort of living on the relentless continent.
And I think Shackleton himself, with his Irish background and ability to communicate and join in, made everybody feel that they were one. It was a team and not a them and us situation.
After multiple attempts to dislodge the ship from the unforgiving ice, the Endurance eventually sinks. After 5 brutal months of living on the glacier and the Endurance gone, Shackleton gives the order that they will move inland, towards the nearest supply drop on Paulet Island. It is below freezing. They take only what they can carry, and their destination is 346 miles away. No one knew where they were. Back in England, they were presumed to be dead.
He realized at that moment he was not going to be able to cross the continent. So, although in his heart of hearts he knew the game was up, nonetheless, he had the quality of leadership. He could hide his feelings and thoughts from his companions.
On April 9th, they boarded 3 lifeboats and headed north. But unless he could determine their latitude and longitude with the aid of a sextant, they could be sailing hundreds of miles off course. After a 16-day perilous journey, they made it to Elephant Island. No one was there that could help them, but they were on land. It was a small comfort. Eventually, Shackleton saw no other choice but to take the best lifeboat, a few of the men, and sail across the Weddell Sea to South Georgia Whaling Station, where they started. It was 800 miles.
And the next minute, he was a martinet, driving his men on, always adapting to circumstances.
And during the agonising boat journey, Worsley wrote in his diary, however bad things were, he somehow inspired us with the feeling that he could make things better.
Miraculously, after 3 weeks, they made it. However, once there, it took Shackleton 4 more months to get a ship to rescue his crew.
He was obsessed, if that's the word, preoccupied with saving the men left behind on Elephant Island, and he would not rest until he had saved them.
On August 30th, 1916, he arrived at Elephant Island to find the 22 men he left behind, all of them alive.
He rescued his men from the most desolate continent on Earth. When times were darkest, Shackleton's light shone brightest, and his leadership and bravery then are an example that we should still follow.
Shackleton's an example that he never gave up. I mean, he was in some very harsh conditions, and he was leading, and he had the pressure. Just imagine the pressure of his entire crew on his shoulders, and that he basically had that pressure, but he was very, very calm and collected throughout the entire thing. And so what he was learning and teaching, we can still instill every single day that, it's going to be okay.
His optimism, commitment, and endurance inspire and motivate leaders of today. When we look at these enduring works, we find important insights on how to motivate people, allocate resources, and act with great integrity in moments of crisis. There are several things to be learned from Shackleton's style of servant leadership. First, to model and inspire optimism. Shackleton believed in his mission and in his team. Secondly, develop a clear, shared purpose. Clarity around purpose has been shown time and time again to be the most important factor to impact a team's success. Third, build unity and commitment within the team. He made sure team members could come to him with concerns and had an open door policy long before the term was coined. Fourth, create a plan and an alternate plan. During the 15-day journey in the lifeboats, Shackleton changed the plan 4 times.
Shackleton may have never fulfilled his dream to go to the South Pole or achieve his goal to cross Antarctica, but he would not accept death. In the end, through tragedy, he brought triumph.
I confess that I felt the burden of responsibility sit heavily on my shoulders. But, on the other hand, I was stimulated and cheered by the attitude of the men. Loneliness is a penalty of leadership, but the man who has to make the decisions is assisted greatly if he feels that there is no uncertainty in the mind of those who follow him.